Hello, here we are again. I'm going to show you how to sew the lamb together. The pattern is on page 171 and 172 of my book, Teaching Through Stories, Jane and Jeremy Learn to Knit. But sometimes it's a little easier to see how to sew it together than just to read about it. So here I have a lamb. I knitted him a little smaller than you might do with the bulky yarn. It's thinner yarn, thinner needles. I actually thought it was white, but it turns out he's going to be called Sunny because he's a little bit yellow. You'll see that this is the cast off edge. And when I cast off at the end of the second back legs, I usually leave a long enough piece of yarn to sew with. So I'm going to sew that together. Well, first I'm going to thread the needle, and now I'm going to sew the legs together. 4 legs. We don't want to sew it together, so we only have 2 legs. So each of these little flaps becomes a leg. Here's the first back leg I'm going to sew together. Here he is, inside up. And I'm going to put my finger in between the 2 edges that I'm going to sew together. It makes it a little easier to be exact. I don't sew the bottom edge together. I think it looks a little funny, and besides, I think he stands a little better if I don't sew it together. And I also like being able to put a little extra stuffing in the bottom if I need to. So here's the yarn. It's attached already. Don't need a knot. I'm going to do what often is called the nibble stitch, or sometimes it's called overcasting or whip stitching. You'll see that each time I'm going in the same direction. I'm coming towards me. I'm taking a little nibble here and a little nibble there. And because this is a yarn needle, it is blunt, so there's no pokey point. It's not going to hurt me at all. One little nibble, second little nibble. And I'm only going to go as far as the top of the leg. I'm not going to keep sewing. Sometimes it's tempting just to kind of keep on sewing, but this would give a little bit of a skewed leg. So I'm going to make sure I only go up to here. It's about 3 or 4 more stitches. 2, whoops. See, you don't want that to happen either. So I want to make sure that that yarn always stays where I want it to be, where I'm sewing. Sometimes it's easy for that just to get caught around there, but let's make sure it stays where I want it to be. I'm going to do 1 more stitch after this. And then you have an option. You can either fasten it off right here and take another piece of yarn and do the rest, or what I like to do, because I don't like to keep stopping and starting, once I'm at the top of the leg here, I'm going to fold it in half. I'm going to match the toes right here. This is the other leg, matching the toes, and I'm going to match the, we could call them hips maybe, here. And I'm going to sew now up the rear end. So my yarn is here already at the hip of one leg. Here we go. I'm going to sew up to the top here. So again, if I could put my finger in between it, if it was thicker yarn, I would do that. But I'm actually just going to kind of eyeball it up to the very top as neatly as I can. Here we go, a couple more stitches. And at the very top, I'm going to do a lock stitch and then clip the tail so it looks like a little lamb's tail, just kind of a little short lamb's tail that they have. And lambs are surprisingly sort of square around their rear ends. Here I am at the top. I'm going to do this last stitch to hold it together. Now my lock stitch takes another stitch in the same place, and I call it a lock stitch because I kind of make a keyhole with this loop. My needle is the key, and I put it through like that and pull it up. And I'm just going to cut it right here so that it looks like a little tail. First I have to find my scissors on my busy desk here. I'm just going to cut it shortish, not too short. There we go. So now I'm going to sew the other leg together in the same way, right here, from the foot to the, we could call it the hip or the crotch, and maybe put 1 or 2 stitches right here to hold the tummy together and the legs together. I'm going to pause the recording while I do that. Here we are again. Here's Sunny, who now has 2 back legs sewn up. I didn't have exactly the right color yarn. I think I gave it to my grandson, but this is pretty close. You'll see that I've sewn the other leg and I've done a couple of stitches right here. I'm going to keep the tummy mostly open because that's where we're going to be stuffing. So I'm going to sew now these legs, and I'm going to sew from the toe up to the middle and off to the other side. And as I do that, I'm going to be careful that I sew all of the legs folded the same way. I know it's easy sometimes to fold 2 or 3 of them one way, and then maybe 1 or 2 the other way, which would make them inside out. So we're just going to be careful to sew them curved in the same direction like that. I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to start again. I've got a knot at the end of my yarn, and there's a good way to make a knot. You'll find that on another video on my YouTube channel. I'm folding the leg, going to make sure that the knot winds up inside, and the little tail there is also going to wind up inside. It'll be like extra stuffing on the inside. Again, I'm not going to close the foot up. Oops, get that out of the way. I'm going to do this overcast stitching or whip stitching. I'm going to match the stitches up as closely as I can so that the leg winds up straight. If you're not careful, it's easier than you would think to kind of turn it, and then you've got kind of a bendy leg. So, and again, it's interesting to see how the leg, which was 8 stitches, is actually shorter on this edge than it is on kind of the shoulder there. So I'm not going to make that match here. I'm going to match it with the stitches here. Can you see that? In any case, when we stuff it, it works out pretty well anyway. It's very forgiving. So here I go up one leg. And when I get to the top, I probably will do a lock stitch and then come down the other side. Here I am at the top of the leg. Just like that. Here it's the top of the leg, but not the top of the neck or the shoulder. So I'm going to do a lock stitch here just to hold it nice and firmly. Here's my second stitch. There's the lock. Here's the key going through the lock. There we go. Now I'm going to reach over, or I could finish it off there if I wanted to, which is sometimes a little easier to think about, but I'm actually just going to go span, just going to span across here to the top of the other leg, fiddling with it to make sure it's even here. And I'm going to aim for this right here. And again, you know, stuffing and sewing it, stuffing and shaping it can make it a little easier. But I'm going to pull these 2 legs together pretty much like that. And here we go. I'm going to sew down this other side right here until I get to the end. Then I'm going to do the lock stitch. And again, if you just want to do one leg at a time, it's probably easier for the first time you do this. The lion is sewn up exactly the same way this far. And while I was looking for this other yarn to sew this little lamb up with, I found a beautiful golden color I'm going to make a lion with. And then I'll show you in another video how to sew up the lion, which again is just the same for the legs. Here's the lock stitch coming up here. There was the last sewing stitch. Here's the keyhole. Here's the key going through the lock, like that. Now I don't want the end to just hang out and look ragged, so I'm going to lead this end inside. I like to think I'm making it disappear. Just going to pull it inside like that. And I'm going to clip the end here so that that end will just disappear right inside the leg and never be seen again. There we go. Now, oftentimes, I like to stuff it now, either through the neck or through the tummy on a bigger lion or lamb like you've been making with the bulky yarn. It'll be easier to stuff through the tummy. But I'm going to stuff the legs. I have some wool stuffing. I'm just going to take a little bit at a time to push it inside. And I'm going to stuff it quite firmly, especially here. These are the bendy bits that need to be strengthened so that the lamb will actually stand. because no lambs actually lie down sideways. If they lie down to sleep, they curl their legs under them, which we can't really do with a knitted lamb. They curl their legs under and sleep upright so that their back is always up. Anyway, I'm just going to stuff that now. So I'm going to pause it again and I'll show you what it looks like when I'm stuffing. Here we are again. I've stuffed all 4 legs and the body, and I've sewn up the tummy just like we did before. Same kind of stitch with that end that was hanging. And now I'm guessing you've been wondering how on earth would this ever look like a lamb's head? Well, just to show you quickly, this is the kind of stuffing I've been using. It's wool stuffing. It's from West Earl Woolen Mill, and you can find the contact information in the back of my book. I've used it for a very long time and I find them really helpful, and it's good, nice, soft wool yarn. Now, how are we going to make this look like a head? There's an end here. This was the cast on edge. We cast on 12 stitches for the beginning of the head. I'm going to thread the needle. And this takes a little finessing, but if you can manage to follow directions and maybe even be willing to do 1 or 2 tries, you'll see how it curves nicely to make a little lamb's head like that. First thing we need to do is to sew up this edge here. So here's the cast on edge. Just fold it in half, sew it up, put a lock stitch at the top and hide the end because you don't want an end hanging out of his little nose. So sewing up again, overcasting, or the nibble stitch, whichever you prefer to call it. Whip stitch is another name. When I get to the top, I'm doing the lock stitch, so that's a second stitch in the same place as the last one. Make a lock, put the key through the lock. I'm not going to cut it there, I'm going to hide it away so it goes inside and it will be like extra stuffing. I'm going to clip it right here. Not too close to the knot or to the lock stitch. We don't want it to come undone. Here we go. Now comes the tricky bit where you need a little bit of judgment. I'm going to put a knot in the end of my yarn here. And again, separate YouTube video if you want to know how to make a knot. There's a little rhyme that goes with it. I'm going to fold the head down like this. I'm not going to fold it all the way down or it looks like he's just kind of tucking his head away, right? I'm not going to fold it just a little ways down or he's got a super long neck. Some lambs do have long necks. Every lamb is a little bit different. Every breed is different. But I'm going to tuck this part kind of a couple of rows away from where the shoulders are. So if I do that, I'm going to start with my knot inside here, like that, so I can tuck that end inside and we'll never see it again. And I'm going to just fold it like this. And I'm going to, here's one, say 2 ridges, which is about 4 rows, 3 or 4 rows. And I'm going to do that on the same on the other side, a little bit like some kind of cosmetic surgery or something, a little nip and a tuck. So 1, 2 ridges, let me go in there and back up to the nose here. So I've made sort of a little triangle and I'm going to pull it together and see if I like it. If I don't like it, I'm going to take it out and do it again. Let's see how that looks from the side. Yes, I can see that's what I would like. Once it's stuffed, it'll strengthen the neck a little bit and then we'll do the ears. So I'm going to do a couple more stitches just to anchor it where it is here. 1, 2, and I think I'm going to sew up the neck while I'm here and then I'll stuff it through the ears. Again, the nibble stitch for the neck and a little bit for sort of the chest here, you could call it. And then we'll stuff the neck and the head through the ears. It's really very flexible where you choose to stuff. Huh? If your needle doesn't come undone. But that's a quick fix. Here we go. The tip to not pulling it out is to always hold it right here, right where the yarn goes through the needle. If you hold it here, it's always going to pull out, but hold it right here and you're anchoring the yarn. Okay, here we go. I'm going to do about 3 more stitches just kind of down the chest here. Whoops, he's frisking around already. And you'll see he's stuffed quite firmly. His legs are quite firm. I'm sure he's going to be able to stand, but there's a little tip I can give you afterwards too, if he's not quite ready to stand. His little legs buckle. Okay, here comes my lock stitch. Here's my last stitch. Now I'm going to do the lock stitch in the same place. Make the keyhole. Where's the keyhole? Somewhere in there. A little tricky to find it. Where is it? Well, I'm just going to lengthen my yarn here like this, and I'll do another stitch if it's too hard to find. Now here's my lock stitch, just like that. Same place as the last stitch was. There's the lock, and I'm going to put a needle through the keyhole there. Pull it up tight, like that. Now this yarn is a bit short, so I'm going to rethread the needle one more time. Hold on to it here. I'm going to guide this thread, this yarn, inside the little lamb. Pull it out somewhere to make it disappear, and then I'll clip it. Now we still need to stuff the head. So I'll just clip it right here without clipping my knitting stitches. There we go. Let's see if he's going to stand. Pretty much. You can also stretch the legs. You're really forming the legs, not just by stuffing it, but also with holding it from the outside. You hold it and kind of squeeze it and shape it. You can stretch them a little bit, or massage them a little bit. If you need to put a bit more stuffing in, you can always go in through the feet. See, are you standing now, little lamb? Pretty much. So now let's stuff the head. I'm going to take a little bit of wool at a time. I'm going to go in through the ears. Sometimes it's easier to go in through the neck or through the tummy, but this time we're going to go through the ears. Doesn't look super comfortable, but I've never had a lamb complain yet. Okay, and I'm going to stuff the head, but not as heavily, not as strongly, not as firmly as the body. Usually if I make a doll or another animal, then I would say that the head has to be the hardest part, because if you can feel your head, then you can feel that the bones are on the outside of the head, but kind of on the inside of the limbs or the belly. So the head should be usually pretty firm. And if you've ever had children, you'll know that the head is the heaviest part, and that usually hits the ground first if they're falling like from a high chair or something. Okay, so here we go. I'm stuffing in the neck. And I know it's not coming out right at the moment, but I also know equally that I can kind of massage it and move it around from the outside. See how I'm pushing the stuffing like this? And I can squish and move the head. I'm going to make the neck a little bit stronger by pushing the wool down into the neck like that. And I'm going to make him curve a little bit, because lambs eat a lot of grass, so they need to be looking down like that. Now the ears, I'm going to take just another little bit of yarn, and I'm just going to do a couple of stitches to kind of indicate the ears. I'm not going to close up the whole side there, right? So you see this isn't sewn yet. I'm not actually going to close that up because I like the way it is shaped if we just do a couple of stitches. So here's the knot. I'm sliding it down to make the knot at the end of the yarn. There it is somewhere. You can see it, I think, on camera. Now, where are your little ears? Oh, he looks a little lopsided. So I'm going to just straighten him out. Put his ears here, stuffing inside the head, not coming out of his ears. Or her ears, I suppose. And I can choose to make it pretty much whatever shape I like. I know that I look at this as like one straight row of knitting to make it even like that. Now I'm going to Go in to make sure the knot is inside. I'm going to do this side first. There's the knot inside, push the end in as well. And I'm just going to do like 2 stitches right here. So here's 1 stitch all the way through, all the way coming back again. And I think I'm going to go 1 more time in, pretty randomly and quite tightly to form the ear like that. You need a more pointy nose, little lamb. Push this stuffing down. Now the other ear needs to be about the same, right? Looks a little funny right now. So here's the nose. Stuffing goes in. Make this sure that's straight. And the other ear is going to go right here. So turning him around, I'm going to go through the head. I'm going to find an equal place here. This is where it's probably a little easier for an adult to do this with a sense of proportion than for the child. But it's satisfying if you can help the child do this. Because it does need to look pleasing, I think, at the end. There's a difference between imperfect and distorted. Imperfect is fine. Distorted is somehow disturbing. So I'm doing the same thing here as I did before with like 2 or 3 stitches all the way through the ear. This is definitely imperfect. But I'm pretty sure I can shape him up afterwards. 1 more stitch all the way through. Lock stitch. And because this particular yarn isn't exactly the same color, I'm going to pull it quite tight and then I shouldn't be able to see it. Or I should be able not to see it. There's the lock. I'm going through the lock to lock it. Now I'm going to hide that end away somewhere inside so we'll never see the end again. One of the tips to do this is also to pull it a little bit tightly here. And then when you clip it, the end will just sort of get sucked right inside. I don't know if you can see that. Oh, gone, all the way inside. So now let's have a look at your little lamb. Oh, it needs a little help here. That neck has turned out a little bit longer than I wanted it to. I'm going to make the nose a little pointier. There, I think he's going to be okay. Let's see, how does he look? I think he looks pretty cute. I can massage it a little bit if I want to. I can even take a needle to move some of the stuffing. Again, a blunt needle. Let's just smooth that out a little bit. How does it look on the other side? You might need a little something here. Oh, your stuffing's coming out of your ears. Here you go. Pulling this down further is probably a good idea. So he's got more of a pointed nose. There, now you're seeing him from the side. I'm going to stand him up now and make sure he stands. You usually have to pull the legs apart for them to stand comfortably. Well, there's one more little tip that I'm not going to do here, but if you want to do it at home, you could. Oh, doesn't he look sweet? You can take another piece of yarn and go in, maybe an adult does this, through the tail area, and then you just sew straight up the middle of his back like that. Pull the yarn, a double piece of yarn is good, all the way up to about the shoulders. Then once you're at the shoulders, you take it through to the neck, like this, through to the throat. See, it's coming out right here. And then you go back in. So you can make a little stitch here, go back in and up again to where you were, find exact same spot, and then travel all the way down sort of underneath this top layer of stitches, like that. So you won't see the thread, you won't see the yarn if it's the same color as your knitted yarn. And then come back out again at the tail, like that, and then pull. And if you pull it, you can imagine it's going to pull between the tail and the neck, and it will pull it up like that. So it does stand much better. I do this with horses because they seem to get a bit floppy sometimes. And then you fasten it off here and tuck your ends away so you don't see it. But I think this little guy, once I persuade him and stretch his legs a little bit, is going to be pretty frisky and run around there. pasture quite happily. There he is. There's Sunny. His little lamb's ears ready to nibble on the grass. Look around. All right. Well, thank you very much. If you're interested in the book, which has more patterns and instructions and all kinds of things, then I recommend Teaching Through Stories, Jane and Jeremy Learn to Knit by Elizabeth Seward, that's me. And you can find it on Amazon, or you can also find it at my website, elizabethsewardauthor.com. And there is an ebook available there, available for download, which is actually much cheaper than either a paperback or a hardback. Thank you, and enjoy your little lamb.